It is Anna Letts Johnson, and welcome to our second Wondering Wednesdays. I'm going to go ahead and wait a little bit till more of you guys can hop on. And I'm super excited to get into this week's topic with you guys. I have some notes for myself so I can stay on track. And we'll go ahead and jump into it. If you are joining us for the first time, if you've never heard of the Conservancy or know who I am, I will go ahead and explain that. My name is Anna Letts Johnson, like I just said a few minutes ago, and I'm the education manager for the San Diego River Valley Conservancy. We are an environmental nonprofit based here in San Diego, and we focus on the San Diego watershed specifically, which starts up in the Julian area, up in the mountains, and then goes all the way down to Del Mar. If you're familiar with Dog Beach, or North Beach as it's technically called, that's where our river ends. Hey, Len, thanks for joining us. And our river is 55 miles long, like I said, and it goes through a lot of different changes. There's an amazing amount of diversity in habitat and in wildlife. So last week we talked a little bit about pollinators and their purpose in the environment. And this week we're going to celebrate Earth Day. Happy Earth Day. I hope you guys were able to celebrate. I know it's a little bit of a shift and a change, especially because we can't interact with nature and with other people that we normally would to celebrate this day. And I'm so thankful to work for an organization and have partner organizations because our mission at the Conservancy here is to preserve and protect and share both the natural and cultural resources within our watershed. They're so precious, and we want to make sure that they're there for future generations to enjoy, to experience, and to learn from. So this week, I have a lot of different topics that is going to be centered around Earth Day, and then also your carbon footprint. That's something that I know everyone can have control over, and hopefully make choices that will benefit our own lives, and then also the lives of people that are going to come after us. So I love that people are popping on in the comments. Len, that's awesome that you were there for the original Earth Day. If you do not know, I'll get to this in a second. This is the 50th celebration for Earth Day, which is so crazy. The first official Earth Day was April 22nd in 1970. So we'll get to those details. And it's awesome. Hi, Cassidy. Thanks for joining. So to go a little bit back into the history of why was Earth Day needed, or why did it happen? And the reason that Earth Day came about was, I think there was a feeling of, a growing sense of fear with some things that were going on in our natural environment and how it was affecting the natural environment, but also people. So I wanted to touch on just a little bit of the history of like industrialization and pollution, and how that contributed to our environment and different environmental quality decreasing. So the first industrial revolution happened in the 18th century in Britain. And as more and more of that gained traction, it moved over into the second industrial revolution, which most people who are watching this are probably familiar with the American Industrial Revolution. And if you're just joining us, again, my name is Anna Letts Johnson, and we're going over Earth Day and carbon footprints. So I really wanted to give you guys some contextual background to what led to these movements, these different laws, and different personal practices that are now in our daily lives. So talking about the Second Industrial Revolution that came over, and the United States really took off in the mid-19th century and continued to boom until the early 20th century. So there were a mass production of goods, there were large factories, there was an influx of population into urban areas, and there were huge innovations that led to a modernized world. And mainly that was transportation, rooted in railroads, steamboats, and automobiles. And then eventually, years later, plane travel, so airplanes. And so with that, was needing new energy resources to keep up with the demand of these different technologies that were being developed. And with that, though, those different energy resources, most of them were non-renewable, meaning that once they were expended, you couldn't use them again. And different pollutants were starting to build up in natural systems. So the two biggest systems that were being affected were water and air quality. And I'm going to go into that just a little bit. But while I'm doing that, I have a little task for you guys. I would love to see a couple of you in the comments. Go ahead and comment, if you can, your favorite photo that you've taken in nature. It can either be of yourself or a picture of nature, and share the year that you took it and the location. Just one. I'm really curious to see how you guys are remembering Earth Day. I spent some of my day today going back through about 5 years of different photos that I had gathered over time and different experiences I had in nature. So go ahead, post that below. Share your one favorite photo from nature that you took, with like the year and location. I'm super curious because a lot of people have been to many different places, and it really shows the diversity of our planet. So a little bit back to those different pollutants that were occurring, that were mainly building up in our water systems and our air systems. So drinking water, potable water that you would obviously drink, you would cook with, you would bathe in, was no longer safe. And then also air pollution was becoming a much larger issue. And it can still be an issue, especially in heavily like populated areas. That is still an issue today. But what happened is leading up into the 60s, along with this industrial revolution, there was a cultural revolution. So there were a lot of changes in the dynamics of culture that were happening not only in the US, but in many places around the world. And so with that, the environmental revolution or movement came about and really sparked the idea of how are we going to be sustainable moving forward? How are we going to make sure that future generations and those with us now are going to be safe and create a safer planet and cleaner planet, not only for us, but also for wildlife and the different habitats around the world. So into the 60s, into the 1960s, that's when you see a lot of that environmental movement, environmental push. And it led up to the first Earth Day, like I said, happened April 22nd in 1970. I found some really cool information about this. Leading up to it, there were a couple laws that came out of this and were enacted, and that is the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, and also the Endangered Species Act. So many laws that people are familiar with now that help us keep our planet clean and safe and protect some of our most vulnerable species. They were enacted all the way 50 years ago, which is amazing. And it was definitely something to celebrate and something we can still celebrate today. So those were put into place, and it was amazing. The first Earth Day, about 20 million Americans, which was 10% of the population at the time, went out in support of creating these different policies to create cleaner and safer habitats for people and wildlife. So really, really interesting that a big majority of the population would go out at that time. So with that, now leading to today and today's Earth Day, what exactly does that mean for us? And one thing that I really wanted to highlight is carbon. So we have all of these Earth Day movements, and especially as it progressed through the year, Earth Day, it's actually an organization that promotes a theme every single year, and Earth Day's theme this year is climate action. And I think that's so appropriate. That's something that the Conservancy is working really hard to be mindful of and adapting a lot of our programs and our land management plans in order to reflect a sustainable future for the Conservancy and the sphere of influence that we have. So definitely with the different community members like you guys that are on today, and then also the different actual parcels of land that we can make sure that they're going to be resilient in the face of climate change. So when it comes to climate change, the biggest thing that we can contribute climate change to is carbon dioxide. So carbon is referred to as a building block of life. So a building block of life, it is a naturally occurring element, and it's considered one of the oldest elements. And the only problem that comes with carbon is actually when it's carbon dioxide. So we're taking in oxygen, and when you exhale, you're exhaling that carbon dioxide. And similar happens when we use non-renewable resources like coal and gasoline, petroleum, and that really contributes to the type of pollutants that we're seeing in our atmosphere. And but we need that energy. So there's definitely that struggle in order to have that energy. We need to have different fuels. And in, I would say, the past 10 to 15 years that I can recall, there's been a shift to more renewable resources like wind and solar energy that I'm sure you guys are familiar with. So with that, carbon dioxide is naturally occurring. If you guys know a little bit about plants, they have like these little pores. They're called stomatas, and they'll open up and they actually absorb that carbon dioxide and release oxygen. But the problem with that is that as our energy usage has gone up and we're not using renewable resources, there's too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And at a normal level, carbon dioxide is actually a good thing. It helps encapsulate our planet and keeps it at a fairly steady cyclical temperature. If carbon dioxide were to disappear completely in our atmosphere, we would have a lot of problems and an extremely cold planet. And the difficulty that we're facing now is that our climate is changing so fast. So our climate is changing really, really, really quickly, and too quickly for our wildlife in order to adapt. So as we're changing too quickly, our wildlife and our habitats can't adapt quickly enough, and we're seeing the consequences of that right now. So to illustrate the effect of having too much carbon in the atmosphere, and the reason, or there's a couple reasons why there's too much carbon in the atmosphere. The couple biggest ones are different industries, so different businesses and factories, and then there's also agriculture, and then energy creation, and then transportation. So we need to keep in mind the transportation, vehicles, airplanes, and what they're moving. They're moving goods, they're moving food, necessary things to keep people safe, but it's definitely affecting our environment. So looking at ways that we can make personal changes in our own lives to help decrease that carbon amount that's in our atmosphere. But I'm going to scoot back a little bit in my dining room chair. So I have this wonderful Earth globe. Let me find the United States, because that's where we are today. Or at least I am. Maybe you're not. So this is our wonderful globe. This is our beautiful blue marble. This demonstration is a wonderful tool that our partners at Climate Science Alliance have introduced us to. If you haven't checked them out before, go check out Climate Science Alliance. They're great. They have so many different activities and climate science specific activities, and we're so excited that we're able to integrate them and put them into our programming as well. So this is our Earth, and I have a blanket here. So I have my blanket here, and this is gonna act as our atmosphere. And normally the atmosphere on the Earth feels pretty good when it has a normal amount of carbon dioxide in it. But what happens over time, and especially with this increased usage of non-renewable fossil fuels that are emitting high levels of carbon dioxide, is our Earth starts to get really, really, really hot. And if you've ever put on a fleece blanket and it's really, really warm, you know you're going to start sweating. Your temperature regulation on your body is going to be all off. And the same thing happens with the Earth. It gets really, really warm. And the carbon dioxide, it's called the greenhouse gas effect. It can't escape. All of that heat that's coming in from the sun, all of that energy, because that's what energy is heat, gets stuck in our atmosphere. It can't escape. All of this heat that's stuck in our planet can no longer escape it because of too much carbon dioxide. So as we start to decrease the carbon dioxide levels in our atmosphere, hopefully our planet will be able to return to a more sustainable level of carbon that allows the effects of climate change to decrease. Because right now, climate change impacts are on the track of being really, really large and impactful. And so we'll get into a couple ways at the end of like, okay, here's all this information, but what do we do? So as I am going over what carbon footprint is, it's not going to be super detailed, but what carbon footprint is, I hope you guys were able to take that little quiz. I tried to pick something that was approachable and quick for people, because I don't know if you've ever looked at them before, but they can be really long. So go ahead and in the comments, share how many trees are needed to offset your carbon footprint. That was the specific carbon footprint quiz that our social media team has been sharing. So I will get to what my results are, which I'm a little embarrassed about, but I will share with you guys in the sake of community. So just a quick description of what a carbon footprint is. So we have this carbon dioxide in our atmosphere, too much of it, and it's leading to climate change. It's happening regionally and also obviously globally. And some areas are seeing climate change faster and more extreme than others. But a carbon footprint is the amount of carbon dioxide that's being emitted due to fossil fuel usage and consumption by either a person or a group. So I did the quiz just for myself, but I don't know if you've ever maybe seen like some of those graphs. Some people, Cassie, thanks for sharing. I love that. I've seen some infographics sharing like the United States carbon footprint is X and the UK's carbon footprint is Y, and so on and so forth. But for this quiz specifically, I wanted to see what your personal carbon footprints would be. So remember, it's the amount of carbon dioxide needed or that's emitted due to the consumption of fossil fuels by one person or a group. So the quiz structure, if you weren't able to get to it, it had 3 sections that it had you fill in information for. And the first section was household. So how many people are in your household? What type of house are you living in? Do you live in like an apartment, a condo, a single family home? How big the house is? And then the second category that they wanted you to fill out was transportation. Do you use mainly a bike, a car, trains? And if you use a car, is it an electric vehicle? And then what we also wanted to know for transportation was how many miles are you driving? And it's so interesting talking to different people. I have friends that live across all over the country, and definitely in San Diego, I drive way more than them. But it's an adjustment, and here at the Conservancy, we're really lucky to be flexible where we work, and so we try to work closely to the field locations that we end up going to. So we try to decrease our driving mileage the best that we can. And the last category is travel. So most people in the U.S. are taking a flight by airplanes a couple times a year. So there are different categories. How many different flights are you taking a year? And then also what's the distance that you're going? So I think most people take shorter distance flights, only like a couple states over. But I usually take longer distance flights. I have family across the country, so that's usually where I travel. So all that being said, that was the structure of the carbon footprint quiz. And I'm looking down at my results, and in order to offset my carbon footprint, I would need 259 trees each and every single year to offset the amount of carbon dioxide that I create in my lifestyle. And that translates to 18 tons, about 18 tons of carbon dioxide is released into the atmosphere because of my own personal actions. So it's definitely something that I've been keeping in mind, and is a check for me as I start to or I continue to make these different personal choices in order to benefit our environment. So with all that being said, if you haven't taken the quiz, I would really recommend you guys doing that, sharing it with people you know. I think it can be hard to quantify like what is like 1 ton or 2 tons of carbon dioxide look like. But I would definitely use that quiz because it quantifies it into trees, something I think we're all pretty familiar with, the size of trees. So imagining a small forest just for myself is a good way to quantify what actions I need to take in order to decrease my carbon footprint. So, like I said, if you haven't taken that quiz, go ahead and do that. And if you haven't shared your results yet, go ahead, pop them in the comments. Like I said, Cassie, thanks for sharing. I love that. And so moving on to the very last bit of our live tonight is going to be discussing what can we do. So remember, we're celebrating Earth Day, and these experiences have been so special to me when I've been outdoors, whether that's by myself, with friends, or with family. And I want to make sure that other people get to experience that in the future. And one thing that I want to acknowledge is that climate change can feel really overwhelming. And so just acknowledging that and talking to different people, I think can be really helpful. Thanks for sharing, Andrea. I love that. And I think I had a really, and I still do have a really good community of friends where we can share in some of our concerns and how are we going to make these choices that will lead to a cleaner and safer environment for wildlife and for people. And so creating a community and asking different people and asking questions can help decrease some of that climate anxiety that I know people can struggle with. And the next point that I wanted to get to was think globally, but act locally. So I think that was something that I definitely struggled with in the beginning was, how do I fix the whole thing? How do I fix the planet? But I'm so lucky that I have this position at the Conservancy, and that we have amazing partners, and we also have an amazing team at the Conservancy. We have an amazing board that supports us and challenges us to find new and creative ways to support our community in making greener and more sustainable choices. And so act locally. Find something in your local neighborhood, in your community that you can do, or even in your own personal life that can help decrease your carbon footprint. And I already mentioned Climate Science Alliance. They're one of our partners. They're awesome. And they have this really cool 10 things that you can do sheet. And hopefully we can post this later on our Facebook page. A link to it. There's this, if you don't know where to start, and especially if you have younger kiddos in your life, it's like, well, what can they do, or what can I do? This is, again, really overwhelming. Where do I start? So there are 10 things that you can do, and here are a couple of them. So I don't want to hold them up too close, But the number one is going to be using less electricity. I know that's something that I try to be mindful of when I walk out of a certain room. I try to flip the lights off. And I know people that unplug their appliances that they're not using, or their lamps that they're not using if they're going to be out for a certain amount of time, and things like that. Ooh, look at you, Len. That's awesome. 160 trees. That's amazing. And number two is saving water. Decreasing our usage of water is something that we can do to help mitigate climate change and decrease the effects of climate change. So this is one that I like to point out to kiddos when I'm interacting with them is when you're brushing your teeth, do you leave the water on or off? When I brush my teeth, I always try to I always turn off my water because it's emitting a lot of gallons of water that I'm not using at all. And also taking shorter showers, creating a greener landscape if you have a landscape where you live, things like that. And the third one is recycle. This, I think, is an amazing part of the environmental movement is that recycling has number three, has become part of a more mainstream lifestyle for most people, is that they recycle cans and plastic and paper. So continuing to do that is something that you can do to help mitigate climate change. And a fourth thing is safely, but you can pick up trash. So unfortunately, when we're outdoors, sometimes we can see trash that was left behind, and we can always do our best to try to make our environment cleaner by picking that up. And the fifth one is walking or riding your bike. I know it's super convenient. I feel you. Super convenient to take our cars places, but if you can, and if it's safe enough for you and your community, try to walk and bike some different places, not only for climate change in our planet, but it's also really good for your personal health. And number six is using, this is, a water bottle. So reusable water bottles and bags, that's also something that's become more mainstream, and it's so fun when I'm interacting with different students. I love to see all their reusable water bottles that they bring to school with them, because that was not something that I did when I was in elementary school. I did not have a reusable water bottle. It was plastic water bottles all the way pretty much up until I got into college. And the seventh thing is eating your veggies. Decreasing your meat consumption is really, really powerful in reducing the amount of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases that are affecting the overall average temperature of the earth. And then 8 is going to be growing different plants for our pollinators, like we talked about last week. So this one right here. So these pollinators, we know that they are really important for habitats and for wildlife, and that they're important for people as well, because they help create so much of the food that we eat. And as temperatures start to rise, these pollinators start to suffer. And the 9th thing is reading more about climate change and how it's affecting us regionally, and then sharing and talking to other people. Just being informed and keeping other people informed, and making those daily choices that you can control. It feels really powerful. And the last thing is starting an earth-friendly project with your family or your friends in your community. And it can be really small, doing something with just your family or just for yourself. I think it's really impactful, and I can't tell you how appreciative the Conservancy is of our community members that come out again and again and again, and help us with our restoration projects, with our weeding projects. We miss you guys, and we are so lucky that you are there to champion our efforts and believe in our mission and what we're doing. So with that, that is our Earth Day carbon footprint celebration video today. I really appreciate you guys engaging in the comments and joining me today. And we so look forward to seeing you next week for our next session, which is going to be all about wildlife camera traps and the photos we've gathered in our watershed and what they're used for. It's a little known use tool, and we will definitely get more into that next week. And make sure to keep an eye out for those for the link to check out those photos, because we're going to be referencing them in our next live. So with that, again, we miss you guys. We can't wait to do things in person with you, like hikes and community classes and restoration projects. But we're so appreciative of you joining us this evening. And if you have any other questions, you're welcome to email us at sdrvc@sdrvc.org. And again, my name is Anna Lutz Johnson. I work for the San Diego River Valley Conservancy, and we hope that you all had an amazing Earth Day, and that we'll see you next week. Have a good evening, everyone.